Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a slightly different approach. We're focusing on just one document, but it's quite something.
It really is. Very opinionated, sure, but also, carefully argued. It touches on politics, history, geopolitics.
Exactly. And it throws out these ideas, these nuggets of knowledge, as the author puts it, that kind of challenge how you might normally think about things. Lots of paradoxes.
Definitely pushes back on conventional wisdom.
So our mission here is to unpack all that. We'll look at how policies sometimes get enacted by, unexpected people.
Uh-huh. And some surprising takes on national identity, particularly with Iran.
Right. And these long-running conflicts looked at through a very specific, unique lens. Basically, we're trying to give you a shortcut into this author's whole interconnected argument.
It's a complex web of ideas.
Okay, so let's just jump in. The first big thought, the hook, is almost, what if the people you oppose are actually maybe better positioned to push through policies you support?
It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It really does. And that kicks off this first section on the paradoxes of power and policy, specifically in domestic politics.
Yeah, the author starts strong, calling voting a fruitless ritual. Pretty cynical take.
Very. Saying political support often gets betrayed, and sometimes maybe having the opposition win is actually, preferable for getting certain things done.
Which leads into the Canadian example.
Right. Canada. They bring up Mark Carney, a Liberal candidate. The argument is, because he's a Liberal, he could potentially implement more right-leaning policies, like, say, slowing mass immigration.
Without getting hit with the same racist label a conservative might immediately face.
Exactly. The author's pretty blunt about it. They don't care who implements the policies I seek.
Mm.
It's purely pragmatic from their viewpoint.
Pragmatic or maybe deeply cynical about party labels.
And then it gets even more tangled with this Canadian monarchism versus republicanism thing.
Oh, yeah, that was fascinating.
So you had Canadian Liberals, who apparently used to argue for a republic, suddenly celebrating King Charles's visit.
Seeing it as pushing back against, what was it, Trump's 51st state comments, affirming Canadian sovereignty through the monarchy.
Which is a total flip.
Right.
And then reacting against this liberal monarchism, as the author calls it, the conservatives become staunch Republicans.
It's like they're defining themselves purely in opposition.
And the author just nails it with that line. Only Canadian liberals can make nationalism and monarchism unsightly, in my eyes.
Huh. Yeah, that line really does capture it. It's less about fixed beliefs and more about, political maneuvering, maybe even just performance. It makes you question what those labels even mean day to day.
It really does. And we see similar patterns, according to the author, in the U.S.
Like the point about the Biden administration at one stage supposedly deporting more illegal immigrants than Trump's administration had.
Yeah, challenging expectations there. And then the focus shifts to Trump himself,
Right.
described as a salesman.
Right, someone who could sell policies that maybe weren't even in the best interests of his core base.
The big example giving is Trump wanting to set up a huge federal database on all Americans.
Run by Palantir, yeah. Which is, a massive data operation.
And the author points out this should be really alarming, especially to libertarians, many of whom actually support Trump.
The obvious question being,
Right. How would conservatives, particularly those libertarians, have reacted if Obama or Biden had proposed the exact same thing?
you can imagine the outcry. It powerfully illustrates the author's point about loyalty sometimes overriding ideology.
And this all feeds into their bigger idea, this overarching agenda.
Yeah, the idea that deep down both parties share the same overarching agenda and they just sort of swap roles when a policy needs doing that might damage their image with their own supporters.
So one party takes the heat for something the other party secretly wants too, maybe?
That seems to be the implication. It's a pretty cynical view of the whole two-party system, suggesting it's more facade than fundamental opposition on certain core issues.
It definitely makes you look twice at the political theater.
Hmm.
Okay, let's shift gears now, moving from domestic politics to Iran.
A very complex subject, and the author has a very distinct viewpoint here.
Absolutely. They're very clear.
Mm.
They don't support the current Islamic Republic. They oppose Islam as a political force, and they oppose republicanism in general.
But, and this is crucial, they feel a strong connection of fidelity to the Persian nation, its history, its culture, its civilization.
It's a key distinction, isn't it? State versus nation.
Completely. They emphasize Persia's long history, over 2 millennia.
And there's that surprising historical tidbit thrown in, too.
About Persia and the Zoroastrian faith, maybe playing a role in revealing the idea of Satan as a personal entity to the Hebrews.
Adds a whole other layer to that ancient history. Now, fast forward to the Islamic Republic today. The author notes something interesting about its structure.
Yeah, the presence of religious minorities, Christians, Jews actually having seats in the parliament.
And, perhaps more surprisingly, the author claims these minority representatives actually support the government as it is constituted today.
Which definitely runs counter to a lot of Western perceptions.
For sure. But despite acknowledging that complexity, the author's own preference is clear.
They want monarchy back in Persia.
Yes. They talk about the late Shah, Reza Pahlavi, calling him a good but misguided ruler.
Misguided how, according to the author?
Primarily because he was too enamored with the West and liberal decadence.
Ah, okay. So not misguided in intent, maybe, but in direction.
Seems so. And there's another paradox here the author points out. Many Western liberals actually regret the revolution that overthrew the Shah.
Right, and they'd like to see a Pahlavi descendant back on the throne, hoping for an Iran that mirrors modern Western values.
Which the author seems to find problematic in its own way. They argue that the focus on Islam as a political force in Iran has led to many excesses, some even having a sort of liberal quality.
How so? What's the example?
This is where it gets really provocative. The author claims Iran has its own form of DEI.
DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, in Iran.
That's the term they use. But they mean it differently. They argue that ethnic Persians are actually excluded from power in favor of other ethnic minorities.
As long as those minorities are Shia Muslim.
Exactly. So it's DEI, but based on Shia identity overriding Persian identity, in their view.
Wow, that's a really challenging comparison. The author is essentially saying,
they're saying the state, being an Islamic republic, exists to benefit Islam, not necessarily the Persian people as Persians.
and they compare that to the Soviet Union existing for communism, not for Russians as Russians.
Right. The ideology trumps the national identity in this analysis.
And this ties into their observation that many Persians are actually leaving Islam.
Yeah, apparently turning to secularism or even Christianity. So here's the really interesting question this raises, connecting back to that Soviet comparison. How does a government, in this view, start to lose its whole reason to exist in the eyes of its own people?
Well, based on this author's line of argument, it seems to be a combination of factors. Internal policies that maybe alienate the core ethnic group.
Like the DEI point, yeah.
Right. And then simultaneously, a shift in the people's own identity, moving away from the state's foundational ideology, whether that's religious or political.
So the state and the people drift apart.
Exactly. Creates this internal disconnect, this void, which the author suggests weakens the start from within, much like they argue happened with the Soviet Union.
Which leads us perfectly into the next section, the future of Iran, specifically looking at reform versus intervention.
Given that internal dynamic, the author comes down firmly on one side.
Absolutely. Reform is always preferable to revolution or conquest. Even if you want big changes, they argue, internal reform avoids the massive suffering that comes with the alternatives.
So they're strongly against external forces getting involved.
Very strongly. They specifically discuss the idea of Israel and the U.S. potentially destroying Iran, maybe even trying to put the Pahlavis back in power.
And the author sees that as catastrophic.
Completely. Predicting millions of Persians will die, and also Christians, who they note are mostly Armenian in Iran.
And there's a historical parallel they draw.
Yes, they argue that when a strong central state in the Middle East collapses, historically, dangerous elements get unleashed, often leading to things like genocide. They point to the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the subsequent Turkish genocide.
A grim warning based on historical precedent, in their view.
And beyond the human cost, they argue a Western-backed monarchy wouldn't even be truly sovereign. It would mean the enslavement of the Persian people to foreign powers.
Basically trading one set of problems for another, perhaps worse, set.
And it would take potentially a century, they claim, for a restored monarchy to have the same level of domestic control the current Islamic Republic has.
So a long period of instability and foreign influence.
Meanwhile, internally, the author sees Iran already changing, becoming less Islamic and more Christian, as we mentioned. The government is losing its reason to exist, like the USSR did.
So the fear is that outside powers might step in just as the system is declining on its own.
Precisely. The author worries that Israelis and Americans are hell-bent on destroying a declining enemy. Not to help the Persian people, but so that the external powers can dictate what their future will hold.
If you tie that all together, it's a powerful argument for letting internal changes happen, for self-determination, really. Prioritizing that over any kind of externally imposed solution, no matter how well-intentioned it might seem.
Yeah, the author sees intervention as fundamentally undermining Iranian sovereignty and leading to disaster, regardless of the stated aims. Okay, final segment now. This one digs into the really deep-seated issues: geopolitical animosity and the nuclear question.
And it starts with a bold claim about history.
It does, asserting a long-standing animosity between Jew and Persian. That's the bedrock for their analysis here.
And they bring up specific historical points to back this up from their perspective.
Right, like alleged comments from the Shah, Mohammad Reza Shah, claiming Jews controlled American media and the banks.
Which the author then links to the West abandoning him during the revolution. Cause and effect in their narrative.
Yeah. And then there's this quite controversial claim about Jewish historical practice.
The idea of maintaining a list of nations that have wronged them.
Exactly. Naming Persia, Rome, the Byzantine Empire, the Russian Empire, and tying this to the concept of Amalek, which the author interprets as meaning essentially subjugation or destruction in the Jewish mind.
Again, it's vital to stress this is the author's specific and highly charged interpretation of history and religious concepts.
Absolutely. It's the lens they are using. They also add that, more generally, Middle Easterners are just naturally distrustful of Israelis, pointing to actions before and after Israel's founding.
So establishing this deep historical mistrust is key to their next point about Iran's behavior.
Yes, because they argue that Persians, even under the current regime, are not irrational.
Which contradicts a common portrayal, doesn't it?
It does. The author suggests that by appearing irrational or feigning irrationality, Iran gets a degree of isolation and protection. Kind of like North Korea, they say.
But North Korea has the ultimate deterrent.
Exactly. Which brings us to the nuclear issue. The author floats the idea. Had Iran maintained their nuclear weapons program, maybe this conflict would have been prevented.
Because it would create a strategic balance. Mutually assured destruction, essentially.
That seems to be the logic. They even point to Pakistan
As an example of an Islamic state that does have nuclear weapons.
and supports groups hostile to Israel, like the Taliban, but hasn't used its nukes. Proof, in the author's view, that possession doesn't automatically mean use.
So the conclusion is quite stark.
It is. Without an Iranian bomb, Israel's security, but also its regional hegemony, is secured. He also believes the window for Iran to challenge that power balance through nuclear capability has passed.
Wow. So bringing all that together, the historical animosity, the strategic irrationality, the nuclear question, what does this perspective tell us about understanding current events?
Well, from this author's viewpoint, it means seeing the current tensions not just as immediate flare-ups, but as expressions of these really deep historical grievances and perceived power imbalances.
Suggesting Iran's actions are defensive reactions within that context, rather than purely aggressive.
That seems to be the core argument, yeah. That Iran's playing a strategic game, maybe appearing irrational, precisely because it lacks that ultimate nuclear deterrent, leaving it vulnerable to what it sees as Israeli and American hegemony.
It paints a very different picture than you often get.
It certainly does. This whole document really offers this fascinating, sometimes uncomfortable, but definitely thought-provoking lens. We've seen these paradoxes in domestic politics.
The complex relationship between the Iranian state and Persian identity.
The strong argument for internal reform over external intervention.
And this deep dive into historical animosity shaping current geopolitics.
It forces you, doesn't it, to grapple with multiple contradictory perspectives all at once. Things are just rarely simple.
Absolutely. Nuance is key.
So let's leave you with one final thought to chew on, building on that idea of the overarching agenda we discussed earlier. If political players, regardless of party, are maybe driven by deeper shared interests, and if real, sustainable change often comes slowly from within, rather than through revolution or outside force, what does that suggest about how we should maybe engage with the news, with political arguments in our own lives?
A challenging question to reflect on.
Indeed. Something to think about long after this deep dive is over.